So how do we start these things?
Well, it's hard now because we're on video. We may break cameras
right.
or something.
No
I
doubt.
don't know.
This is a new day. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, I feel like I need to say back again, but on video, maybe.
Yeah, back again on video. I like it. Yeah, this is a whole new world. Yeah, nobody.
Really
They
is.
may if somebody watches this on video, they may go, "Oh gosh, can't do that podcast anymore." That may be how this goes.
That's for sure. I mean, it shows how insecure we are. We just spent the past 5 minutes talking about our backgrounds. What does that say about us?
Oh yeah. Well, you were actually fixing your hair, so yeah.
See, if we weren't on video, this would normally be where I would flip you off, and now I feel like I can't do that, right?
I know. Yes, exactly. Yeah, we can't do it. Can't do it. You have to restrain yourself.
That's right.
Yeah.
What I do like
and
about
I don't
this is
have
it's probably
Eva.
going to get into our topics a little bit faster, right? So we were discussing actually off mic, just in our friendship, about the idea of emotional regulation, and both of us said, hey, this is an excellent topic for an episode. I'm eager to hear your take on this because you've been with men that are emotionally dysregulated for decades now. So you definitely have a pattern that reaches outside of an individual man's experience. I think it may be helpful, though. I can remember when I was first sitting on the deck at Deer Camp, a place we talk about a lot because we have shared experience there. I can remember hearing the term emotional dysregulation, and I had no idea what the hell you were talking about. So maybe we should just start with the definition.
Yeah, maybe so. Yeah. I sit with so many men where this emotional stuff, period, is kind of like, a foreign language. And oftentimes it scares men to death, including me. Not that I'm some emotional savant, but certainly just in doing my work and being a part of just working with lots of other people, especially men along the way. Man, the ability to regulate emotions is I think probably one of the keys to recovery, maybe one of the keys to life, because so often what we're doing with our emotions that so many of us men especially, we don't even know we have those. We might have to Google an emotion or something. Thank God we can do that today, right?
Right.
And then if I ever pull out the dreaded feeling wheel in a session with a guy, he kind of goes into a coma or something. It's like, oh my gosh. But just emotional dysregulation is just obviously it's a pretty simple definition. I do not have the ability or skill set in order to regulate my emotions when I get activated, when I get under stress. And so often it's kind of what we saw growing up, what was modeled. We're so much more like baby ducks than we realize. And typically, I don't know about your dad, but my dad, regulating emotions was not high on his list of things to do. And so we had just kind of learned this stuff naturally, and usually what we learn is not going to be good in the long run. And I often say, men have basically three primary emotions. I'm angry, I'm hungry, and I'm horny. And
That's it.
One of those is an emotion. The other two, not so much. But man, it is so important to really begin to understand what it means, what it looks like when we're not able to, and then kind of how do we begin to practice something that is just going to be a critical part of our recovery.
Well, I love that explanation. I know that we have, both genders listening. I think it would be disingenuous, though, to try to talk about this from the female perspective as if we've lived it. I know what I lived in my home growing up. My father was definitely and is definitely an emotional man, and I could observe those emotions. My disconnect was we didn't talk about them. We didn't talk about what they were in order to name them. We didn't talk about how to deal with them, how to strategize around them. We especially didn't talk about how to interact with a female's emotions when those emotions are lighting off and happening inside of our home or in relationship. What do we do there? There was absolutely zero coaching. There was a lot of observation, though, and I have figured out in my work, and by the way, I'm one of those guys that you slid the feelings wheel across to, and this disrupted our friendship because you did it right in front of my wife, right? You just went for it.
Yeah.
So
yes.
My wife was like, "Yes, he's definitely regressed here, and thank you for the word pictures and the little color wheel." But growing up in my home, it was certainly we're going to observe emotions, and there are going to be some dominant emotions inside the home. For my particular home, it was anger because life is difficult. I would assume that was the reason. But I think that makes my point. I had to make an assumption about that as a child, as a young man. And I would say tragically, I started to replicate how to handle certain emotions through observation. I replicated that in my own marriage. You would say I know for sure. That's a common thing, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, because it's like we're gonna live out what we saw as a model. And however dad did emotions, we're probably going to do it that way. And I certainly, in my own journey, trying to figure out, that I had emotions that was huge. And I'm still figuring that out. But I think so often, we're not just really attuned to what's going on inside of us, emotionally, especially as men. I think for women, it's more natural. It's more instinctive. They are wired for relationship. Women take care of infants. And so they are typically much more attuned. Now that doesn't mean that all women are perfect or anything, because certainly there are things that affect them as well in their own upbringing and their own trauma and the things that they've all experienced also. But in general, women are going to be more in tune emotionally with themselves and with others. And for us men, it is just a foreign concept often, because I always say, as a boy, playing sports or something, and in high school, and you walk into the locker room, and if you just, hey guys, I'm really sad today, you're probably going to get your butt kicked, I would imagine. It just doesn't work that way. But when I use this with a wife in a counseling setting, and they're kind of surprised that that doesn't happen in the boys' locker room, because in the women's locker room, if a girl walks in and says, "Hey, I'm really sad today," I mean, they all come around her, and there's like group hugs, and they talk, and I mean, it's a very different experience. And I really, it's amazing how often, truly, I don't think women realize that man world is a lot different than woman world. And certainly boy world is very different than girl world and what we grow up in. And so, I think it was a few years ago, the University of Glasgow in Scotland, they came up with 4 core emotions. Prior to this study, there were 6 core emotions. And I am glad, because I'm a man, I had a hard time remembering 6 core emotions. But boy, I can remember 4. I got it. And those 4 core emotions are simply mad, sad, glad, and afraid. And then if we look at a feeling wheel or anything along those lines, what you're going to see is just other words that are descriptive of the core emotions. and if we could just begin to focus in on the four core emotions, we might actually begin to gain awareness and really begin to grow.
Yeah, and I've exactly had this experience of trying to distill it down to exactly what I'm feeling, because if those listeners are familiar with the feelings wheel, those that are, I get hung up on the outside, what those descriptors are, and I'm not getting to the core. And I remember in my own therapy, full transparency, sitting with you on a very regular basis years ago, I began to understand that my emotions are driving my actions and my history is driving my emotions. And I just had no concept of that. I thought I was reacting and being present in the moment and being proactive in my marriage and in my own thought life. There was a lot of history back there that was informing how I interact with what my relationship is with emotions. And the reason why we're talking about this, I think, so extensively today is that emotions are a huge driver for addiction. But I don't know that most people walking around today who are in the throes of guilt and shame in their addiction understand your emotions are driving this addiction. You've got to stop just trying to stop the addiction, and we have to address the underlying causes, correct?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think so often, I know for me, because, I've been doing this work going on 34 years now in my own journey of recovery. And a lot of times I will kind of take it for granted, or maybe I just think, everybody's just like me and they get this stuff and they understand it, or not that I get it, fully, but just, on a path of growth, beginning to understand all the jargon and the little ditties, as Eva calls it, in recovery, and that everybody's
that is
just,
very Mississippian, by
speaking
the way, little ditty.
It is, isn't it? Oh yeah, little ditty. But it's like, well, everybody's just speaking the same language, and we all get this stuff, and we're all headed in the same direction. And I think it is important to remember that, man, not everybody's on the same page. And we see it for you and me, Ben. I think the best example is, we're fortunate because we get to do, deer camp and our men's coaching weekends together. And, there's guys that show up, I call it fresh off the boat. And they begin to just tell their story, and you begin to go, wow. And this guy is just absolutely lost as a goose when it comes to connecting the dots, collecting the dots, and connecting the dots in his story, right? And and again, we're not judging that guy. We completely understand that, man, this is a brave new world. But it's often it's kind of funny when you just like, this guy seems like a pretty good guy, and he's a good church guy, been going to church most of his life, and involved in the church, and but then when you start talking about the as I call it, the bone and marrow of life, these like the emotions, emotion regulate, just all the stuff that we talk about just all the time. Boy, he truly is like a deer in the headlights at deer camp. And so but we know that it's just this journey, this that we all have to get on. And it's the journey of awareness. And, awareness is what Jesus talked about every time he opened his mouth. Do you not see? Do you not understand? And I'm guessing his language was much stronger than how it gets churched up in the translations, because it's just frustrating when you're talking to people about this stuff that, like, somehow, and I'm just using church people because you would think that, after years and years and years of sitting in church, that maybe you might understand that, like, awareness is a key pivotal kind of point in the process, because it's what Jesus talked about over and over and over again, right? Are you not aware? Can you not see? Do you not understand? And then even in the statements that he's making to the people that he encountered, everything is about awareness. And so this understanding our emotions and becoming aware of what's going on inside of us is just so critical, because it has been the driver in so much of the, illicit, behavior, the acting out behavior. Even when I say the term acting out, it's always like some negative connotation. But here's the deal. Everybody walking around on the planet is acting out, right? What we are acting out are our thoughts and emotions in action. And if we've got a lot of distorted thinking, if we got exposed to porn, at 8, 9, 10 years old, and nobody ever talked to us about that stuff, and then that became an illegitimate coping skill, then, what we learned to do, unbeknownst to us, was basically just kind of stuff our emotions, repress our emotions, especially the negative ones, and then medicate it, numb it, escape it with some type of illegitimate coping behavior. And porn is a great one because it works very effectively. And so beginning to understand this connection between my emotions, certainly my anxiety, my fear, those things that are distressing, because I've got to understand that. I've got to be aware of that, because those are the things that are driving me into the distorted thinking, and then the negative emotions that I am going to go act out, because those things are going to, they have to have an outlet, and it's coming out. We don't repress it and stuff it and bury it and swallow it. I mean, we try to, but it just doesn't work.
I think you have just literally explained the modern therapy experience and life coaching. I mean, I love the fact that this is kind of spreading, wider inside of people that are understanding this and able to coach people through it. There's some danger there. There are a lot of bad therapists and a lot of bad life coaches out there that have a little bit of knowledge about this.
It's a both and, yeah.
Yeah, it's getting pretty dangerous out there, which I think, that's why podcasts like this are so important, because in long form, we're able to explain what the bedrock or the basis of our methodology is. One that I've learned from you as a mentor in my life: we have emotions that are driving nearly all of our behavior. Those emotions we are predominantly, as men, unaware of. Then we show up inside of a counselor's office because something has happened, an affair, discovery, disclosure, very rare on that side. And we're full of shame over the behavior. We're full of shame because our spouse kind of already understands that the emotions are driving this. And we're just hung up on the fact that we've attached this coping mechanism to handle negative emotions very early in our life. And it feels extremely normal for us to try to medicate through coping mechanisms negative feelings. And negative feelings are just part of life, and disclosing those and being engaged in community. I mean, I think if you were to say, all right, what is LifeWorks at its base? What is Deer Camp at its base? Why a book called Sex, God, and Chaos? This is the essence of the entire movement, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, totally. Because these are the fundamentals. This emotional stuff, the attachment issues, those are the things that are we've got to begin to figure out in order to, if we're going to do recovery. That's so much of the work. And we say this all the time. It's not about stopping some bad behavior. I mean, certainly that's kind of number one. But right. I often see so many times it's like, okay, if I can just, stop watching porn, stop having affairs, whatever it is, okay, then I'm good. But that's not the point of all this. The point of it is, this idea of recovery is we are recovering the life God intended us to live. And we talk about this in all the work that we do. This idea of backfilling. If I've got this behavior that I've been using in order to cope, and then all of a sudden, okay, I have to stop doing that. If I don't begin to backfill, as we call it, with the positive things, with the awareness, beginning to learn how to regulate emotions, certainly even in a greater way, my mission, my purpose, my calling, the vision for my life, all of those things are, that's the essence of recovery. And I see this with so many men, not really beginning to be more intentional about the bigger picture of what this is really all about. And, as I don't know, as believers, as people of faith, the bottom line is, God's got one thing in mind, and he cares about one thing only in our lives, and that is like infusing us with the nature and character of Jesus, and beginning to operate on this earth as little Jesuses walking around, loving people, caring for people, sharing the good news, the gospel, discipling. All the things that make us followers of Jesus. And the number one thing that I think doesn't get enough airtime is just this idea of our character. I often say at the end of my faith journey, I may already be there. I think I'm going to wind up being a Jewish Catholic mystic, because the thing I love about the Jewish faith is, it is all about your character, because, life is here and now. There's no eternity and all of that good stuff. So what you do here in this life really matters. And so often I don't see that passion in evangelical church world, and I think it's one reason why where our culture is, where the church is today, is kind of sad in a lot of ways. And then the Catholic mystics I love, because so much of those writings were about, it's about the mystery of God and the intimacy, even to the point where some of the writers, the Catholic mystics back in the day, they were banished. Their writings were banished because it was almost sexual in their intimate relationship with Jesus. Now, wow, what if that was the focus of all of our lives, right? But no, what we do today and what we offer people is basically, come to church. I don't know, start serving, go to work in the parking lot ministry. I'm not putting down the parking lot ministry. It's a great critical need. I know you told guys that when you were pastoring, right? It's the most important role in the church. Yeah, you did. I know you did.
That's right, from door to door. Yeah. Well, I do feel we have a certain amount of listeners that they are not Christians. They don't participate in faith in their life, and I think this is part of the reason what we're discussing today is they've perhaps tried it and been left wanting. Like it's not addressing the core thing that's going on in my life. This is why I love the fact that we go back so much to the original story. And I think this is a lot of your influence, a lot of a man named Phil Hardin's influence we've referenced on the podcast before. But as a father in that original story, when we see God move into Cain's life, into his day, and say, hey, this emotion is right outside your door, and you must master it or it will destroy you. I don't know why we don't have more sermons on this these days. I guess maybe because
kind of
as we were
important.
going through the 80s, Yeah, it was used as like a shaming passage, so you stop touching yourself or something like that. But as with every story, Bible story, it's so much more rich than it has been presented.
I think most
in
sermons, I think the essence of most sermons is stop touching yourself. That seems to be the main message, right?
Well, that may be what you're hearing,
Maybe,
right?
But yeah. Maybe it's because those guys are having a problem, stopping touching themselves. I don't know.
Yeah,
that would never happen.
I can see the comments now coming through that we're making light of that.
Oh, here
which
they
we
come.
certainly aren't. Yeah, that's right. What we are talking about today, though, in this part of the discussion is we have, as part of the biblical narrative, strong evidence that God created us as emotional beings, and He very much cares that we spend time in our lives learning how to appropriately leverage and manage those emotions. Just those couple of sentences alone would clear the room, if it's a room full of men especially. So what I want to do is infuse into this episode a little bit of how do we start the process. Let's say that we convinced a man up until this point. How do we start the process of injecting things into our life that are healthy emotional regulation skills? Additionally, as we're having this conversation very publicly, it will bring the female, the spouse, in to have some language to create a dialogue inside the marriage about this very principle.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think certainly, as we said earlier, the first step is awareness. The first step is actually realizing that I have emotions. Wow. It's so, and the goal, especially for us men, is not that we start, going around emoting everywhere, right? As a man, that would kind of be a little pathetic. And the thing of it is, your wife doesn't want you, doing that either. She that I've seen that where guys just, kind of an emotional, I don't want to say basket case, but just emotionally, way overboard. And boy, a wife will get really tired of that pretty quick, because it's that desire for the masculine strength and the feminine strength. It's a both and so as a man, I think the goal is just really becoming aware of what is going on inside of me. Am I sad? And it's okay to say, boy, I feel sad today. Am I glad? Am I afraid? And because, part of what we've got to do is begin to identify the emotions, and then begin to speak it out instead of act it out, right? When we talk about acting out, I said it earlier, it's just my thoughts and my emotions in action. And oftentimes I will ask a guy, so instead of asking him what he's feeling, because for men that can just be, a conundrum, I might ask him, so man, dude, what are you thinking right now? Because if I can get a man talking, and he begins to talk about what he's thinking about, then, chances are the thought is going to lead him to some type of an emotion. And even, for wives talking to a husband, it might be better to approach a man with a question, which we don't recommend, approaching men with questions. We always say that, in a healthy marriage, communication goes up and questions lower, right? Because so often, the wife is trying to, draw it out of him, drag it out of him, and she'll just start peppering a man with questions. And you know how this works. We know how this works. A man just kind of begins to go into, tune out mode, shut down mode, avoid mode. I'm just trying to offer something that might be helpful and get you where you want to go. if you want to relate with a man. And so just saying things like, what are you thinking about right now? And boy, when a guy starts kind of scratching his head thinking, he will eventually, if you just, kind of give him enough rope, it's amazing. Eventually he'll get to an emotion. And so it's just a matter of not, putting each other on the defensive. And we all do that. We call it, we want to meet at the show up place. Shout out to Eli Machin. But right. I'm just inviting Eva to show up, and then we're going to just have a conversation, and I'm going to check in, with a feeling. That's why we do Fanos. And the first part of that is just, today I am feeling blank. And so it's really becoming aware that I do have emotions, and then beginning to figure out what is going on inside of me in this particular moment. And the great thing about emotions is they're not permanent. They actually come and go, and they pass. I might feel mad right now, but in 5 minutes, I might feel glad. But boy, so often what happens is people begin to make decisions based on an emotional state of being, instead of kind of my logical prefrontal cortex. I'm making decisions out of my limbic system, the base part of my brain, where memory and emotion are stored. And so I've got to really begin to discern what's going on inside of me in order to be able to even make good decisions.
This is a fascinating discussion. And I've been around this a lot, and even today I'm like learning things, right? Just slowing down long enough to think about how emotions, especially inside of a marriage, can impact the dynamic. And the main thing I'm feeling, just to check that in as you're describing this, is, no wonder it's so frustrating. No wonder this is such a frustrating process. And no wonder the female side of the relationship is trying to draw things out, because they are aware something beneath is driving this, and I need to hear from you what it is. And no wonder the male side of the relationship gets defensive, frustrated, feels accused. It's so hard to hang on to mutual curiosity. I actually sit with so many couples inside of my practice that show up very frustrated at what's going on. And it's why it leads to that frustration, what comes out inside the session. The wife says, we're here because I'm disconnected from my husband and I don't even know who he is. And then the husband says, we're here because we're not having sex and I didn't decide to be a priest for the rest of my life. The level of frustration is so high, but if you just start to move in there with a little bit of patience and being settled, and quite frankly, that's our job. That's why we're good at doing it when called upon. But when you're sitting across a kitchen table or in a living room and you had to pause Netflix to have an argument, man, this stuff is really difficult. So I just want to reach out through this podcast and let our listeners know, if you're frustrated trying to engage the emotional part of your marriage or your spouse, you are not alone. And this is a skill that takes reps to develop.
Boy, it does. It takes practice, and as you said, it's a skill set, right? And we have the ability to learn it, but first of all, we've got to be open to it, right? And that's the hard part, because I think that I'm right, and I know what's going on, and I have these negative emotions because it's her fault. And then vice versa. And so now, we're like two kids playing in the sandbox, and then all of a sudden somebody throws sand in the other's eye, and then, the next thing we know, we're hitting each other over the head with Tonka trucks. I mean, that's how this stuff works, and it escalates so quickly, because what happens is, this stuff gets tapped into, And then it's tapping into old wounds, old messages, old emotions that have been there for a long time. And now I'm going to go into, fight, flight, or freeze. I'm going to go into survival mode. And then the trap door to my prefrontal cortex, it snaps shut. I mean, it closes. And now I'm operating in my monkey brain or my gorilla brain. And now I'm dropped into the limbic system, right? Base part of the brain. And now it's like 2 8-year-olds, just going at it. And if we can just begin to slow this stuff down, we tell couples all the time, so much of what we're teaching, what we're offering, is just a way to simply slow it down, because this stuff is happening in milliseconds, and then all of a sudden, we're in World War III. But if I can slow it down and go, okay, what's this really about? Why am I going into warrior mode? What's happening inside of me? And then, and we tell couples so much of the work is beginning to develop a language that we don't have at the beginning of this process. And that language is things like, gosh, when this happened, boy, it really tapped into that old message inside of me that somehow, I'm on my own. I'm not enough. I'm inadequate. I'm insignificant. I don't matter. And boy, those messages go way back, way down deep into that limbic part of the brain in the hippocampus where memory and emotion are stored. And boy, when that gets poked, now I'm this big person, and boy, I can fight my way through it. I don't have to take it anymore like I did as a child, like a good little soldier. And I mean, what could you do back then? Just, pack your lunchbox and run away in your footy pajamas, I guess. But this stuff that was happening to us where we had no choices, it's all still there. It doesn't go away until we begin to talk about it, until we begin to access it, until we begin to become aware of it. Boy, we're going to cycle in these fights, in these arguments, in the relationships that we're in, especially the closest ones, and that typically is going to be, our wives and our husbands. And so, boy, beginning to figure this stuff out is so important.
Man, you're handing out free therapy right now.
Dude, yes. How do we charge for this? Where do we put the credit card up there at the bottom? Square payment. Yes.
Well, we're running a little short on time today, but I would like to loop back if I can, because I do know that a lot of our listeners are in very desperate situations. And I'd like to wrap this episode up by talking about that patterns piece that creeps into the methodology here of getting all this sorted. But just to give a brief example, and then we can kind of war game this for a second. If I, as a young man, coupled when I'm feeling sad, then I masturbate, or I look at pornography and masturbate. I coupled those two things together, and those things have been coupled for 20 plus years. So when I'm in my marriage and I'm sad, then I go to this thing that I coupled it with that actually has nothing to do with my wife. Maybe my wife made me sad.
Zero.
Maybe something else made me sad. Yeah. But I have coupled those things, and I'm continuing that behavior habitually as part of a pattern. We would call that, I've got this urge. I just can't stop. I don't even know why I do it. After I do it, I feel so guilty. I mean, these are all phrases that you and I hear on repeat. How can we reach into that man or that woman's life? Let's not just make this about the man. That man or that woman's life who has coupled, let's make it general, a sexual experience to regulate negative emotions that they would call an urge, one that they believe they can't even fight. I mean, what is step one there, other than just saying, all right, I'm sad? How do you begin to uncouple sad and sexual?
Yes. Well, it's interesting when we do our intensives, we kind of work with 3 timelines. And and one of the timelines is porn and masturbation, and then we've got the physical sexual activity timeline, and then the bottom one is just the family of origin and kind of life timeline, like what's going on in your family growing up. And what is so interesting every time we do it, what you see is the fusion of the masturbation and or the pornography. It is a straight line connection at that particular age of whatever emotional distress was happening in the home, and boy, it gets fused together, and we're not aware of that. I mean, we don't even have an emotional language when you're 8, 9, 10 years old. But what we are doing is beginning to, I mean, we figure it out because it works. Is I'm numbing, I'm medicating whatever's going on and wherever the emotional distress is, and now it's gotten fused with sexual activity in the form of masturbation, watching pornography, whatever. Those two usually are going to be. Those are connected once one is discovered. I mean, you may discover masturbation first, but then when pornography gets introduced, they are linked together. And so you see this connection in that we call it fusion of the sexual and the emotional, and so beginning to understand that is a critical piece. And then as you look back over the lifespan, what you're going to see is when we get under significant emotional distress, you will see the acting out behaviors ramp up. And it is amazing. And that may be, increased porn and masturbation. It may be increased hookups. It may be increased visits to prostitutes or massage parlors or strip joints, or, the 31 wonderful flavors in this crazy, sexual brokenness arena. And so I do believe that just, beginning to figure out and make those connections is so important. And then beginning to come up with ways that are, healthy coping skills. And, one of the things that we have to begin to do is beginning to do life together, connected in community, because I've been doing this long enough to know that there is no other way that a guy is going to get better unless he really begins to understand what it means to pick up the phone and call somebody way before you're in the middle of the battle. Because if you're not in the habit and in the practice of just, having friendships, intimate friendships, and just, picking up the phone and calling the guy and talking to him about the football game or whatever is going on, if you're not developing the habit, then when the fire gets hot, you're not going to make that phone call. And so this idea of life together is so important, because it's just, think about, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Well, the reason we lose that battle every time is because it's a 2 against 1 battle. The flesh is the mind and the body, right? And the spirit is going to lose that battle every time because it's 2 against 1. And so if I'm just trying to cognitively think my way out of this, read my way out of this, sermon my way out of this, it's not going to work. And so I tell guys all the time, if you're sitting at work or in the office at home and you're on the computer, and then all of a sudden, okay, the urge comes, well, man, the best thing you can do is like get up, walk away, go walk around the block and get the body engaged, because part of what we've got to do is we've got to recondition the mind and the body. And it's like, man, it's a twofold battle. I mean, Paul writes about it, I beat my body into subjection. He's talking about this process. And then he talks about the mind. Don't be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. because the distorted thinking is what leads to the negative emotions. And so, man, it's just really such a process. You can't pray your way out of something that you behaved your way into. And behavior is thoughts and emotions. And so I've got to really begin to work on those two things fundamentally if any of this is going to change.
There's so much there, I think, that really lays the groundwork for a lot of future episodes. But it does come down to, I think, the essence of what you started there in your answer was connection is the cure for everything that ails us, right?
It is. It's so simple. And I often say that I think this porn plague, I think it's another wake up call of moving people back to the reality that the essence of the Bible, the essence of the gospel, is relationship, right? And there's something in us as human beings to gravitate towards some kind of, if I just get more knowledge, if I can just quote more Bible verses, then that somehow is going to work and I'm going to be good. But man, God just moves us back to this place of like, no, the only cure for especially an intimacy disorder, because that's what this sexual brokenness is. It's an intimacy disorder. The cure for it is intimacy, and that has nothing to do with sex.